Welcome back to Embrace the Grind, folks. Now, I know March Madness has been canceled, but we got some March Madness content for you of how you could participate in the bracket, and we could crown our own March Madness champion. Cue that music. So originally, I was going to bring Andrew, one of my buddies, on to talk about his bracket before the Selection Sunday Committee came out and released their bracket. But if you've been following the news and following everybody, you would know that March Madness has been canceled this season. And as a result, there's no bracket from the Selection Committee. Although they debated about doing it today, there's no bracket, there's no March Madness tournament, and there's no sports whatsoever on for at least the next 60 days. So what's a sports channel supposed to do? Well, I thought of this idea after Andrew sent me his bracket prepping for this video originally when we were going to do it, and I thought after March Madness was canceled, what if we did our own March Madness? So what I need to ask from you guys first before we release this bracket, before I bring Andrew in, is to share this video with all your friends. Follow, like, subscribe, follow me on Twitter at JRO'Brien_28, because what I want to do is create our own March Madness tournament bracket. So when I release this bracket, if this video is at 5,000 to 10,000 views by Wednesday at midnight, I will be reaching out to websites around the internet, seeing if someone will host the bracket. And then that way, y'all can make your own brackets as if you would for a March Madness bracket. And through that, you can keep track of who wins each matchup. So you're probably wondering how we're doing these matchups. I will be putting Twitter polls, straw polls, whatever you guys want, that type of poll on the internet on hopefully Saturday is when we could start, if this gets enough leg room or gets legs under it. Saturday is when we'd be releasing the full brackets for you to start voting. So it'd be the first round matchups of all the teams on Saturday. Sunday would be the first four would be Saturday, sorry. The first round itself would be Sunday. The second round itself would be Monday. Then we'll take a few day breaks, and on Thursday we'll do the Sweet 16. Friday we'll do the Elite 8. Saturday we'll do the Final 4. And then on Sunday we will do the National Championship. Monday we will then come out with our National Champion. It's not March Madness in a way, but we could create some madness. We could have some fun. It's which of these 68 teams have the best fan base. Who's going to reach out? Who's going to win the championship for their team? And call yourself the Embrace the Grind March Madness champion of the world, man. We're here to have fun. I am welcoming in Andrew Balco on the Embrace the Grind phone line. Andrew, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
So, what made you make this bracket, other than me reaching out? I had reached out to you about this before we decided we were going to make the video. What made you decide to make this bracket out at first?
You know, I've just been following the season since the tip-off, between the very first games between Baylor and between Louisville and Miami. And me and my roommate decided that, kind of to mourn the fact that we aren't going to be having March Madness, we decided to make the bracket just to kind of help ourselves,
So how'd you choose these teams, and why should people believe in this as the tournament field?
So the way that we kind of went through it was as we looked at all of the teams that we believed. So we looked at all of the teams that already had made it through their own conference tournaments, and we listed those teams for their auto bids. And then for all the other brackets that hadn't fully fulfilled, we just looked at whatever the number one seed is, and we picked them to go. And from there, I looked a little bit more strictly on statistics between points per game and the net rankings and a lot of those nitty-gritty statistics, while my roommate Isaac did a lot of the eye test type of deal. And that's kind of how we went through each team and decided where they would fall among the different seed lines, and then therefore where they would fall within the bracket.
So now that we've explained the bracket, now how we've explained the challenge of what we're going to be doing, let's actually release the bracket. Starting at your first four, or your last four in and your first four out. Who you got?
So for the last four in, we have Indiana and against NC State and Wichita State against Texas. All of these teams share, a bunch, good wins sprinkled in all throughout their season. Teams like Indiana don't have any bad losses on their resume at all, just not, enough extremely strong wins away from home, So NC State has a giant win over Duke. Indiana has a big win at home against Florida State. So all four of those teams were able to sneak in, even though that their records didn't necessarily reflect that they should have been in. And our first four out,
you had Arizona State, Stanford, Xavier, and Memphis. Why were these the first four out?
Memphis might have fell slightly victim to the expectation requirement. We thought that Memphis was going to be really good coming into the year. With the loss of James Wiseman and just kind of derailed their season. So, they just missed the tournament. Arizona State had a really great run in the middle of Pac-12 play, but at the end of the day, they just didn't have big wins against great teams like Colorado, Oregon, and, they did beat Arizona, but they just don't have much of a resume outside of those three teams. Stanford just has a lot of bad losses, and the season at the end of the year was just really what did it for them. If they didn't finish off so poorly, they would have made it in. And finally, for Xavier, they just couldn't seem to really get on a roll. Everybody expected them to be finishing top three in the conference, and it just did not work out for them.
Yeah, it's tough to see without these conference tournaments, these teams put in the last final push to make March Madness. But we're just going off of not what if these tournaments went on, we're going off of what we know now today. So who are your four number one seeds, and who's the overall one seed in the bracket, if it's not obvious already?
We have the number one overall being Kansas. It's hard to disagree with their resume. They only have, I believe, 3 losses against good teams such as Baylor and Villanova. So Kansas definitely secures that number one overall. And then right after them, you have Gonzaga, Dayton, and Baylor. All three teams that have single-digit losses, sub-5 losses. So they really have put together what makes to be the best resume this year.
All right, so let's get into the rest of the bracket and the rest of the field. I know you guys are all on the edge of your seat right now. What I'm going to go through the first 4 matchups in each region, and I'm going to do the following matchups, and then we'll continue going there, and I'll have the graphics up while speaking. So in the Midwest, we're going to start off with the number 1 overall seed Kansas versus Northern Kentucky, who's the 16 seed. Number 8 Rutgers versus number 9 Marquette. Number 5, Ohio State versus number 12, Eastern Tennessee State. And number 4, Louisville versus number 13, North Texas. So why don't you go very quickly, piece by piece, of why each team's at this spot. You already did. Just say one thing about each team for these fans to get excited about these matchups.
Rutgers, this is the first time they've made the tournament in almost forever, in over 2 decades. So, it'll be really exciting for them. Geo Baker has been the catalyst for this team. They've had a great improvement in a guy like Ron Harper Jr., and their front court's been better than what it has been in quite some time between Yeboah and Johnson. So, they've been exciting to see in the Big Ten. And then Marquette, it's hard to disagree with a guy of Marcus Howard's talent, a potential play of the year candidate. Ohio State definitely has Final Four potential on their team. They've just had a rough stretch throughout the middle of Big Ten play or right at the start of that. So, just that kind of hurt their resume just enough to be put down to a 5 seed. Eastern Tennessee State, they've been one of the better, mid-major type of schools. They're one of those teams that can put anybody on upset alert. So they make for what would be your ideal 12 seed. And Louisville, they've had some great wins against great teams in the ACC, but the main reason they fall victim to a 4 seed is because there's so many not great teams in the ACC. that create bad losses for them. So that's why they sit right there on that 4 line.
And then on the second half of that bracket, we have 6 Butler versus the winner of Indiana, NC State. Number 3, Kentucky versus 14, New Mexico State. 7, St. Mary's versus 10, Richmond. And 2, San Diego State versus 15, Bradley. Now quickly just go through these teams as well, like 10 seconds on each team.
Butler has been on and off all year, so they still have less than 10 losses, though, so they definitely deserve a 6 seed at worst. Kentucky has one of the best backcourts in the nation, some great wins in the SEC and some bad losses as well. St. Mary's, Jordan Ford just always seems to help them power through anything, so they definitely deserve their spot. Richmond has some good wins and lacks bad losses. They beat like a Wisconsin team earlier in the year. And then San Diego State only falls to be a 2 just due to that loss to Utah State in the Mountain West tournament.
So not if we were playing actual basketball, with the way we're voting for these matchups, who's the team of the Final Four do you think comes out of this section of the bracket?
Based off of that, I foresee the Elite 8 being Kentucky, Kansas, and then I think it's just going to be based on the demographic on who people like more between those two teams. So I'm willing to bet that we'll probably see Kansas.
It'll be interesting to see whether fan bases go realistic picks or whether they will go the fandom picks. Going to the South region, we have 1 Baylor versus 16 Prairie View A&M, the 8 seed LSU versus 9 Oklahoma, 5 Auburn versus 12 Liberty, 4 Wisconsin versus 13 Belmont. Why don't you give us a quick overview of these matchups right here?
So for LSU, they've had a pretty lackluster non-conference, but then they picked it up in SEC play, so they definitely, maybe we put them a little bit low at 8, but I believe it's correct. Oklahoma's sitting at the 9 just because they've picked up a really big wins at the end of the year for them that secured the tournament spot. Auburn had that great start to the non-conference, but they didn't really play anybody particularly special, and then they kind of derailed themselves with big losses in the SEC. Liberty is the slowest team in the nation beyond Virginia, and that always can keep you in a game. So, that also makes them one of those ideal 12 seeds. Wisconsin's at the 4 after a late season push, winning 8 in a row to win the Big Ten title. And then Belmont is another one of those upset alert teams. They don't quite have the talent that they did last year, but they can still take anybody in the nation to the wire.
On the second half of that bracket, we have number 6 Illinois versus 11 Wichita State, Texas, the winner of that matchup. Number 3 Creighton versus 14 Akron, 7 Colorado versus 10 Texas Tech, 2 Maryland versus 15 Little Rock, Arkansas. Why don't you go through these picks a little bit right here?
Illinois is one of the most slept-on teams, not just in the Big Ten, but in the entire nation. The big thing that they're lacking is that one big key win, marquee win. So, they just fall out of 6 just due to that. But beyond that, you can't sleep on them. Creighton has been one of the most confusing teams in the nation. They're one of the better three-point shooting teams on some nights, and on other nights they aren't even a tourney team. So you got to just kind of watch with them there. Colorado, they have some very key guard play and forward play, but they have very little interior depth. So it'll be tough for them to go if they get into any sort of foul trouble. Texas Tech, they just don't have a go-to scorer this year. Davide Moretti has some great tournament experience, but it'll be hard for them to go without somebody stepping up. And then Maryland has just been one of the better all-around talents in the Big Ten. Everybody on the court always works hard for them, and they just have the talent to go far if they put it all together.
Who do you think's coming out of this region? What fan base do you think wins this region?
Assuming our demographic, I wouldn't be surprised if we could find a way to get Wisconsin, Maryland in the Elite 8. Therefore, I think people would probably realize, and push for Maryland at the end there. So I'm expecting to see Maryland, but, teams like Wisconsin and Baylor can't be left out of the conversation.
Yeah, just to let you guys know, Andrew and I do go to Wisconsin, so there's a slight bias when it comes to that pick. You guys know who I'll be picking in that matchup. In the West region, we got Gonzaga versus 16 NC State, the winner of 16 NC State, Siena. Number 8 Providence versus 9 USC. 5 BYU versus 12 Stephen F. Austin, and 4 Oregon versus 13 Winthrop. Why don't you walk us through this one?
You know, Providence is another one of those teams where they're one of the hottest teams in the nation right now, and I wouldn't even be surprised to see them making the Sweet 16 and maybe even pushing a little bit further. USC has been one of those middle-of-the-line teams in the Pac-12, so it depends on your feelings on the Pac-12, on what you think of them. They have a great big man, but beyond that, they're just all average. BYU has one of the better players in the nation in Yoeli's Childs. You know, he can really go at it, but if you can go at him right away really early, it'll be a hard game for BYU to make it out. Stephen F. Austin, they have only, I believe, like 3 losses on the year, including a win over Duke at Cameron Indoor. So, you know, you can never really count them out, but I'm not too faithful strictly just because of how weak their strength of schedule was. Oregon's one of my sleepers. You know, they lost a very key player, Chris Duarte, throughout the year, but you know, Oregon is one of the better offenses in the nation, led by one of the best players in the nation in Peyton Pritchard, so I really like Oregon.
Yeah, on the bottom of the bracket, we have 6 Iowa versus 11 UCLA, 3 Michigan State versus 14 UC Irvine, 7 Arizona versus 10 Utah State, and 2 Villanova versus 15 Eastern Washington.
So Iowa is another one of those teams where they're absolutely amazing offensively, but they just don't have the defense to stick it out this year. So, you know, they could put a few teams on upset alert, but you also wouldn't be surprised to see them take an early out, you know, just if they can't get their offense clicking on a given night due to their lack of defense. UCLA is more or less in here just because they did finish as the 2 seed in the Pac-12. They didn't really have anything super impressive in terms of wins, but the lack of failure for them has gotten them this far. Michigan State, you know, had rocky stretches all throughout the year, but at the end of the day, Tommy was able to get them to the tournament through Cassius and Xavier Tillman. So, you know, you can never overlook the power of Michigan State. UC Irvine did lose their best talent, Max Hazard, this year, but they were able to find tournaments through a 14 seed. So you never want to overlook it, but I wouldn't think too much of them. Arizona has been on and off all year. They're plagued by the freshman bug where, you know, they have the talent, but at the end of the day, they may just not be able to push through some of those more experienced teams. Utah State is, on average, the largest team in the nation, and they have one of the most dynamic players in Sam Merrill, the player who hit the buzzer beater to beat San Diego State in the Mountain West tournament. So you can't sleep on them at all. And Villanova, you know, Jay Wright and Connor Gillespie have just been able to lead this team through a difficult Big East this year. They didn't finish where they would have liked to finish, but they were able to get through it. They do lack a lot of size, but, you know, for what they lack in size, they make up an effort.
Yeah, so who do you think comes out of this region?
You know, I truly do believe that Michigan State will make it out. You know, it's hard to bet against guys like Tom Izzo and Cassius Winston when it really comes down to game time.
And in the East, we have 1 Dayton versus the winner of 16, Robert Morris, Boston University. 8 West Virginia versus 9 Houston. 5 Virginia versus 12 Yale. 4 Seton Hall versus 13 Vermont.
So a team like West Virginia, it all relies on if they're actually going to make shots on a given night. They have the best front court in the nation between Derek Culver and Oscar Tshiebwe, but they just have nights where they cannot shoot, and it will just kill all offensive momentum for the team. Houston is one of the smaller teams, but on the same note, they're also one of the best rebounding teams in the nation. So they're a great team to go up against West Virginia. They have to be happy about that matchup. Virginia is another one of those slow-paced teams. You know, there have been times this year where they've been offensively challenged, but towards the end of the season, they've really picked it up, getting some good wins against great teams like Louisville and Duke. So, you know, if they can get that offense to click, there's not many teams who can stop them. Yale's one of those knockdown three-point shooter teams, though, so they can always put any team that can shoot on a given night can put any team on upset alert. And Seton Hall is one of the teams with the most depth of scoring. The issue is just that they don't always recognize it and utilize all their players to their best ability just because they have such a dynamic player in Miles Powell, So sometimes they just want to give him the ball and make him work as opposed to sharing the love with everybody. And then on top of that, Vermont has one of the better players in the nation that always gets looked over in Lamb, So they're a team that I think if they got unfortunate call to play Seton Hall, but any other 4 seed they could have easily put on upset alert.
And then on the bottom half of that bracket to finish it off, we have 6 Michigan versus 11 Cincinnati, 3 Duke versus 14 Hofstra, 7 Penn State versus 10 Florida, 2 Florida State, and 2 Florida State versus 15 North Dakota State.
So Michigan has had a lot of confusing losses this year where they've, a lot of confusing games in general where they'll go out and beat teams like Gonzaga but then lose to some lower level teams in the Big Ten. So it's hard to say exactly what they have the power to do. All of them really come together and seem to really be good under Coach Howard, but it's hard to just say how exactly they'll pan out. Cincinnati is still kind of looking for their personality or who they truly are. So they got here by, barely squeaking by in the AAC, but it's hard to see them really doing too much in the tournament. Duke is both one of the best offensive teams and one of the deepest teams in the tournament this year. They do have their times where they struggle from 3-point range, but beyond that, there aren't very many holes in their game at all. Penn State seems like a very frontline team in the terms of they have a great starting lineup, but their bench is kind of shallow, so it's hard to say. Florida was expected at the start of the year to be a top 10 team, and they just never could find a way to make things click. They have a lot of talent that just don't seem to work together, so that's why they fell to a 10. But if they could finally find a way to make it work together, they could go on a Final Four run, but it's unlikely by this point in the season. And then Florida State is very similar to Duke. Maybe you just flip that offense for defense. Still a great offensive team, but the biggest thing is that their depth and how they're able to outlast teams.
So that's our bracket. Before I go in to close out this video, or actually, who do you think comes out of this region? What fan base do you think dominates this region?
It's really hard to say. If we go based on fan base, I would say Duke. But if we go based on reality, it could be either Duke or Florida State. I think whichever one of those teams can beat the other, that's going to decide who gets to play in the Final Four.
Now, folks, let us know who you think we overseeded, underseeded, or who you think should have been in the bracket that we left out. Andrew did a great job with this bracket. Remember, I will leave this bracket probably in a PDF file under the video, so click the link. I will also leave my Twitter at JRO'Brien_28 in the description so you can follow me to track this bracket if we end up going through Twitter. I'm still kind of putting this all together. We kind of said, why don't we do this today? So I'm editing this probably at 9:30 Eastern and then releasing it by hopefully 11 p.m. at the latest. I got relocated due to everything going on. I'm back in New Jersey instead of Wisconsin, so that's why you see a different scenery around me. Please share this video. Andrew put a lot of work into this bracket. We miss March Madness. I am heartbroken we don't have March Madness. I know this doesn't compensate for March Madness in itself, but it's something that's somewhat involving sports. It's as close to sports as we're going to get right now through this hard time. So leave a like, subscribe to the channel, follow me on Twitter. Well, Andrew, what's your social media that you want to plug right now?
Ooh, you see, don't really have much social media there, so.
Nothing? You don't want to plug your Instagram, your Twitter, none of it?
Everything's all private as part of the issue.
I mean, maybe people will feel happy to be able to follow you if you let them through.
Maybe Twitter. I don't know. I don't even know. I don't use Twitter as part of the issue.
Oh my God.
Like, if it was anything, that's where I would start doing stuff in terms of athletics and posting stuff, but I don't,
What's the Twitter handle?
It's abalco3238.
Go follow him on Twitter, folks. Get him using Twitter. I've been on him for a while.
You can edit that in any way you like.
You know, it's going
Barstool Big Cat.
There's nothing on here. Big Cat, I'm asking you, retweet this. I know you said you'd inject yourself with corona if you didn't get March Madness. Well, this is some type of March Madness, so a little loophole through that. Retweet this. Folks, join in. Let's have some fun. Let's have our own March Madness. Thank you so much. Thank you, Nick Murata. I believe his Instagram's Nick the Guitar Guy on Instagram for the new intro music we just welcomed in. Thank you, Andrew, for coming on, making this bracket. Thank you, Isaac, who isn't here, for also participating in making the bracket. Guys, spread the message. Let's have some fun. We're all probably... Nah, I'm not even going to say that. Let's have some fun, and let's have our own March Madness. I want to see a 16 seed go on a run, folks. Fan bases, Northern Kentucky, Prairie View A&M, NC Central, Siena, Robert Morrison, and Boston University. I'm calling you guys out. Your teams. Let's get another UMBC result. Thank you so much, folks. Remember to leave a like, subscribe, and cue that new music. Bye.